Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Beyond Second Cognition. I'm Beall. The topic of this discussion is shift in consciousness from what to what. For all those spiritual seekers and people that are involved in the so-called Great Awakening, because it encompasses all of you, I want to ask you a very relevant question that you need to ask of yourselves. You're going through a process referred to as the Great Awakening, or you're anticipating a shift in consciousness. In both of these cases, what are you awakening from, and what are you trying to awaken to? The same thing applies to the folks that are waiting for some type of magical shift in consciousness. What type of consciousness are you shifting from in your perceptions, and what do you think you're shifting to, other than some mystical promise pie in the sky shift in awareness? From the Great Awakening standpoint, it's easy to sit here partially informed of political fraud, chicanery, and corruption and criticize the normies. A lot of you forget that you were a normie once upon a time yourself and didn't know any more than those people that don't pay attention. But some of you put yourselves up on a pedestal of being brighter, smarter, and ahead of the normies, and you forget where you came from, because you were a normie too once upon a time. Same thing goes with a shift in consciousness crowd. You've been sold a lot of mystical promises, like there's going to be some type of magical shift in your consciousness to some imagined state of consciousness, which the fact of the matter is most of you can't describe if you're put on the spot to describe it. And so the question you have to ask yourselves in either of these categories, because they're both kind of combined, is what are you shifting or awakening from? And what do you think you're shifting or awakening to? Do you think conspiracy, political fraud, tyranny, and corruption is all you're awakening to? Because I got news for you. It's happened in the past on more than one occasion. Tyranny of the tyrants has been exposed time and time again. Once things settle down, everybody goes back to sleep, and then the cycle continues, and you wind up back where you are. The fact of the matter is, what people perceive as consciousness in the present circumstance is not really consciousness. What it is a state of awareness of the intellect of the human brain, and it has nothing to do with consciousness at all. Ideally, we're going to start functioning with a knowing interface with consciousness. At present, we're just dealing with ideas fabricated by our intellect and imagination that gives us some false notion of what consciousness is. Now, in my latest works, The Flesh Robot and The Flesh Robot Part 2, I answer some of the questions about who and what we are as a species on this planet. A lot of people aren't necessarily going to like the answers delivered, but I don't think that they're going to be easily refuted. The flesh robot is driven by its intellect. The intellect is driven by ideas and programming. In order to find a shift in consciousness or go through a great awakening, we have to transcend all the programming of the intellect and tap into our inner consciousness, our inner sentient awareness, which has mostly been out of our reach. This is usually referred to as intuition or insight, and for the most part, people don't listen to it. If we want answers to something and our insight delivers us an answer that we don't agree with, we usually just say, "Oh, that's crazy," and we dismiss it rather than investigate it because it doesn't fit with our perception of reality. So we're operating in a realm of perceptual, intellectual interpretations which have been programmed into us by our cultures, our societies, our religions, and our ideologies, our school systems, peer pressure, take your pick. But we're all walking around programmed by other people. And what you think is your consciousness is your intellect believing that it's something that it's not. Intellect is not consciousness. It never was. So what we're shifting towards, for those who have the courage to progress further and give up fanciful notions about going back to the way it used to be, or that there's going to be a magic wand waved and people are going to wind up with vast supernatural capabilities about healing or oobieing out or waking up on a new earth or ascending or going to heaven or whatever. There's an alternative, and it's called functioning as a human being in collaboration with consciousness. But I ask each of you to seriously consider where you're coming from, your present state of mind and your awareness, your belief systems, and where do you think the Great Awakening or the shift in consciousness is really going to take you to? Can you remove the ideas of going back to the past, which hasn't worked, the glory days weren't that glorious, or buying into some pie-in-the-sky escapist notion that Jesus is going to come take you back, or the Grand Mahdi's going to take you to heaven, or that all the other New Age promises, which have never ever in thousands of years been fulfilled, they're just the dangling conversation, the hook or the carrot that's before your eyes. And people haven't yet gained the wisdom that the stuff doesn't pay off. Now, I'm not sitting on the outside of this equation poking holes at people's beliefs, because I was stuck in those rabbit holes just like you guys were. You know, I chased the love doctrine, and I was caught in the Jesus and Satan doctrine, and I never saw any fulfillment in them. I got tired of finding no answers in all of these ideologies that posted all this fanciful promise pie-in-the-sky stuff. I looked and looked, just like a lot of you have looked for decades in some cases, and always came up dick. Wasn't anything there at the end of the day, just a lot of promises and no payoff. And it didn't matter which rabbit hole I went down into, there was still no payoff until I figured out how the game is working. I dug deeper and I got rid of this addiction to the pie-in-the-sky notions that aliens were going to come save us, or we're going to get the magic wand transition and we're just going to all turn into Einstein or something. The truth of the matter is what you're shifting to is a broader level of perceptual awareness, working with genuine consciousness, not with your intellect thinking it's consciousness. If you want to know where the Great Awakening is going, we're moving towards the second cognition, what I call the actuality. Because right now we're dealing with realities, and realities are perceptual illusions. Look at how all of you used to be asleep at one point in time, how you were just a normie sheep like everybody else until you started to wake up. Then you started to find the truth through some of the conspiracy stuff. Found more of it if you're following the Q organization, which tells you expand your thinking and expand your mind. Become self-autonomous, do your own research, and if you do actually do that, and don't just listen to the words and wait for the next Q message or something, or from the New Age site people looking for the next guru who's going to fill your head full of fanciful nonsense with no payoff, like transcendental meditation and shamanism and all these other mystical treatments that they peddle to people, looking for that dynamic woo-woo experience, they're not going to go anywhere. Wise people have already been down this road and walked away from these processes because they don't pay off. So the question is, how long are you going to be paying homage to these ideas until you figure out they don't pay off and start looking for the meat rather than the candy? All the books we've written point the way out of illusion world that you think of as reality. As a lot of the political garbage is coming forth, whether it gets prosecuted or not, some people are turning themselves into a person of knowledge. You don't turn yourself into a person of knowledge if you don't do research, if you don't do study, and if you don't expand your perceptions to see a picture bigger than what you're presently looking at. The more you work your intellect into getting rid of old fallacious belief systems, the actuality starts to show through. Once you get the truth of actuality, the paleness of the illusion realities starts to fade. And the wise ones get a hunger, and they keep progressing further to dig the rabbit hole out from under them and come up with answers, which is what I've done after 30 years of messing around in spiritual rabbit holes. Another thing you have to understand is that spirit isn't consciousness. Although the two terms have become conflated, humanity is on a course right now to step into a new level of awareness, working knowingly with consciousness. But at present, you don't know what consciousness is, not in the form in which it can work with you. You're still playing the game of the intellect and the ego. But I want all the listeners to seriously consider, where am I coming from with my great awakening, and what am I awakening to, and where does it stop? And even more, should it stop? Same applies to people looking for the shift in consciousness. What are you shifting from, and what do you think you're shifting to? This should cause some serious pondering. Might even give you a headache thinking about it. But you need to do a serious analysis, and as you do, though, you have to look at the beliefs you're hanging on to and face the music that they have never paid off in any real sense. They just keep you on the hook. Believing, 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 hoping, wishing, never really realizing anything, but mouthing the belief makes you feel good. It gives you some sense of emotional security, so long as you don't challenge it too much. Because if you do challenge it too much, you're going to find out there's nothing much behind the belief except a hollow promise. So if you want to know how to get out of that trap, for you partially awakened people, there's more to awaken to. If you have the courage to awaken to it and find out where the Great Awakening can take you, where the shift in consciousness can take you. And we put it in our works. But you have to ask the questions first. Why do I believe what I believe, and is it going to lead me to greater awareness, the greater awakening? Is it going to shift my consciousness into a higher state of awareness other than wishful thinking? Ponder these things seriously and be honest with yourself. And if you can see through the illusion of how you've been deceiving yourself, chasing rainbows, then perhaps it's time you find some pragmatism and look at the picture in a different way, which is all I suggest. Got to give yourself a chance to see it another way. For those of you doing the work, stay the course and don't give up on yourself.